Does God exist? Can we make moral statements? Do we even have free will? Can we even ever know the answers to these questions? How do we know if something is true? In my quest for answers, I found something. I'll let you be the judge. Am I onto something? Or have I gone completely insane? I present to you the argument from intuition. Premise 1. Deductive logic requires intuitive axioms like the law of non-contradiction, the law of identity, and the law of excluded middle. Premise 2. A strong enough intuition, if it cannot be disproved, must be accepted as an axiom of truth. Otherwise, logic, rationality, and deductive logic are impossible. Premise 3. The intuition for free will, morality, and God is greater than the intuition for the law of non-contradiction, the law of identity, or the law of excluded middle. Conclusion. If you are to accept logic as true, you must also accept God, morality, and free will. Now let's go through one by one each premise and see what criticisms come to mind. At first, premise 1 seems to be clearly wrong, but it's actually quite easy to prove to be correct. You can try this at home. For example, try to prove the law of identity. You can't. You simply cannot. It is an axiom that we have just intuitively chosen to be true to allow us to do logical arguments and to use logic. So I don't think premise 1, when it comes down to it, is actually even very contested at all. I think premise 2 comes quite clearly from premise 1, because when we start to accept that we cannot absolutely prove the law of identity, for example, or the law of excluded middle, nor the law of non-contradiction with absolute certainty, we kinda have to accept also premise 2, meaning that a strong enough intuition causes us to take these laws as a truth, even though we cannot be absolutely certain. Now I think premise 3 is going to be the most contested one. Let me explain why I think almost everyone, if not literally everyone, actually agrees with premise 3. Let's look at the law of excluded middle, for example. I mean, we simply have a logical fallacy called the false dilemma, or the black and white fallacy. Now, they're not quite the same with the law of excluded middle, but the logic kinda still stacks up. We can look at a lot of things and say that they're probably not a binary, but they might be more of a spectrum. For example, temperature. Can you name me the exact temperature when a cup of coffee is not hot anymore? Assuming that a cup of coffee can either be hot or not hot, what is the exact temperature? Now let's say that temperature is 50 Celsius. If I were to give you 2 cups of coffee, one being 50 Celsius and the other one being 49.9 Celsius, would you really be able to tell that, oh, this one is clearly hot and this other one is clearly not hot? You probably wouldn't, nor would probably any human on planet Earth. And let's say that you were able to tell the difference. Let's say that you were absolutely certain which is which. Now, that still doesn't answer the question to what actually is hot and what is not hot. Because now we have a problem of, okay, well, 50 Celsius is hot, but what about the sun? If the sun was only 50 Celsius, that'd be pretty cold for a star now, wouldn't it? So, in general, the law of excluded middle just seems to not hold up when actually looking at criticism. Now, of course, it is a very good law and it should be used in logic when making logical statements, but in the real world, we can see that it can definitely be at least questioned to some degree. And a lot of the same could be said of the law of identity and the law of non-contradiction. I mean, just because we haven't found a situation where something is not identical with itself, or we haven't found a situation where something can be true and not true at the same time, doesn't necessarily mean that that's impossible. And now I would like to look at the statements of morality, free will, and God. I think they're very intuitive. They're so intuitive, in fact, that even nihilists admit morality to some degree. That if you were to ask a nihilist who literally does not believe in morality at all and tell them that, hey, would you be fine with me taking all your possessions and locking you up in prison for the rest of your life? They would certainly say no. They would be like, that's not fair. Why should I go to prison for no reason at all? And why should I lose all my possessions? So even they have the same intuition for morality. The same way, even determinists have a very strong intuition for free will. Even though they say that, oh, well, free will probably doesn't exist. Even they admit that we have a very strong intuition that we can make decisions. And the same way atheists have a strong intuition that, well, yeah, God would explain a lot of the world very well and why the universe exists. It is a very intuitive thing for humans to believe in. Atheists would admit that. For example, if we look at monks, monks such a strong intuition for a God that they literally dedicate their whole life to this God, and they literally break the rules of the natural world. They abstain, meaning they don't reproduce, and they go on long fasts, meaning they don't eat. These are two things that in a completely naturalist world we shouldn't expect to see this ever. Or if we would expect to see it, we would expect it to die out within a few generations because it's not beneficial in any way to survival. Yet somehow, generation after generation, there are monks, meaning that there is something that is not just explainable by a naturalistic world that causes it. And the argument from intuition would also explain understanding that we can never make absolute truth statements because the very laws of logic are intuitively chosen. They're axioms that we just choose. And this could explain why faith is such an important part of religions, meaning that God knows that we have a strong intuition to believe in God, and God knows that we can never make a deductive, ultra-logical argument for it. So the logical conclusion is that there is no point in God even trying to give us some ultra-logical answer, because we could always just say that, well, the axioms which that argument is based upon is arbitrary. And that's probably why religious books don't have some premise by premise ultra-logical argument that proves it. And that's why many religions rely on faith. In conclusion, I think the argument is very hard to attack against, because the moment you try to make any axioms for a logic which you could use to criticize the argument, you kind of have to accept that I could just make this exact same axiom for God, or for free will, or morality. Meaning that the only real way to criticize this argument is to say that we can know nothing for certain never. And what that means is that without God we can't make any truth statements at all. Which kind of leaves the atheists only two choices: either to accept that God does exist, or to say that God doesn't exist, but we cannot make moral statements or truth statements, and we can only just exist. But I would certainly like to hear if you have any criticisms that you come up with and any thoughts that this might have awakened in you.